Good, 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 good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the House Appropriations Committee, Transportation, and the Environment Subcommittee decision day. Before we get started, a few announcements. First of all, I want to thank our members, including our full committee vice chair, Vice Chair Chang, who's been with us for many of our meetings in the course of the year, and of course my vice chair, Vice Chair Watson, as well as the rest of the committee members, Delegate Lewis, Delegate Metzger, Delegate Anderton, Delegate Edelson. Thank you all so much for your participation in this process. And of course, thank you to all the great folks who have been supporting us. Ken Weaver, who is our sort of primary team member, as well as all our analysts from DLS, including Steve, Carrie, Ryan, Andrew, Sam, Samantha. And if I forgot anybody, I apologize, but I think I covered everybody who at least supports this subcommittee. And let me also thank Jewel and Carol, who have both provided our tech support over the course of the session. So with that, before we begin, for the public, all the decision documents will be available on the General Assembly website under Budget and then Publications after the subcommittee meets, and they will reflect the subcommittee's actions today. Additionally, unless given specific authorization to the contrary, the House Appropriations Committee will be dealing with all ads in full committee. So each subcommittee will only be taking cuts this afternoon, and then anything we choose to add will be done in the full committee. And with that, I would like to turn to the DLS analysts to begin walking us through the decision document.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, you should have a document that says Decision Documents, Transportation and Environment. We're just going to go in page order. We do have one analyst that's not here. It is currently in another committee. If she doesn't make it in time, I'll just cover her item. So we're just going to go page order. And with that, we'll start with page one.
All right. Good afternoon. Page one is the Public Service Commission. The recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred. However, we have a series of color page items for your consideration. The first item is narrative requesting a report on procedures implemented to ensure correct versions of filings are submitted in court proceedings.
Move to adopt.
All in favor, signify by saying aye. Anyone
Aye.
opposed? Next item.
The next item, beginning on the bottom of page one and continuing on to the top of page two, is narrative requesting a report on outcomes of appeals of PSC decisions in the judicial process.
Move to adopt.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
The next item on page two and continuing on page three is narrative requesting a report on enforcement actions taken by the PSC against third-party energy suppliers.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
Page number four is the Office of People's Counsel. The recommendation was to concur, and the agency concurred.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? Next item.
On page 5, the Chesapeake Bay overview, its annual language of the recommendation here to restrict funding on a number of agencies until the submission of a report on historical and projected Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. The agencies concur in part. They're okay with the report. They just don't want the funding restricted.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? Next item.
The Maryland Energy Administration begins on page number 8. The first action is to increase the turnover expectancy for the new positions in the budget, which is a decrease of $208,000 in special funds. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? Next item.
Item number 2 on page 8 is annual narrative requesting accounting of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund included in the budget books. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? Next item.
Next item on page 9 is narrative on the Maryland Gas Expansion Fund. The agency concurred. However, we have the color page item on page 10 for your consideration, which would decrease funding in the MEA budget for that purpose.
Move to reject.
And is there anything else you want to add to the rejection?
And I would like to amend that motion to say we're going to adopt CP-1.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Does anyone want to be recorded in the negative? Okay. Next item.
Item number 4 on page 10 is narrative asking for a report on rebate programs funded through the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
The Department of Planning, on page 12, the DLS recommendation is to concur with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
Okay, so this is the one where Samantha's not here yet, so I will step in. This is the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund. First recommendation was for narrative to address policy options to address surplus decay. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anyone
Aye.
opposed? Next item.
On page 14 was a color page item that had been requested, also on MAFE surplus activities, asking for a 10-year history of surplus and surplus to assessment ratios.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
Turning now to the Maryland Insurance Administration on page 15, the one recommendation was for narrative on the insurance tracking system project history. The agency concurred with this narrative.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? Next item.
On page 16 is a color page item that had been requested, asking for a report on current MAFE rating methodologies and whether that methodology is adequate to ensure adequate rates.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
Item on page 17 also, he is here.
Sorry. The Maryland Lottery and Gaming Control Agency begins on page 17. There's one recommended action to delete funds budgeted for the televised lottery drawings in amount to $1.175 million, and the agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? Anyone want to speak up for the televised drawings? No? Okay. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
Okay, now we begin the Department of Transportation on 18. The first two items are annual budget bill language. The first is language requiring notification of changes to the capital program. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? Next item.
Item number 2 on the bottom of page 19 is annual language establishing a position cap. The agency concurred in part. There had been 50 positions that they had received authorization to create for the apprenticeship program last year. They had not done that yet, so when I recommended the language, I had the old number. That would increase 50 positions. In addition, since you met, there have been 13 firefighter positions that were transferred from the military department for firefighting at Martin State Airport to the BWI firefighting station at BWI through the Maryland administration. That's 13. So MDOT has asked if you would increase that as well in this action.
Move to modify by adding 63 pins, which would equal 9,120.5.
Great. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
Recommendation number 3 on the bottom of page 20 was intent language regarding Maryland Department of Transportation actively participating in regional efforts to develop a mileage-based user fee, and also requested a report. The agency concurred. They said they are already engaged in this activity, did not believe that funding needed to be restricted.
Move to reject.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
That takes us over to page 22, the Secretary's Office, annual budget bill language requiring or restricting the operating grants and fund special funds to that purpose. The agency concurs.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anyone
Aye.
opposed? Next item.
On page 23 is a color page item that was requested, asking for a report on the fees for zero and low emission vehicles that other states impose and the revenue that those fees raise.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
Page 24 is the Secretary's Office PAYGO, annual language requiring notification of changes to the capital program. The agency concurs.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On page 25 is a color page item, a request for narrative, requesting a report on the ability and process that federal funds can be flexed between highways and transit. This is just asking for a report.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
That takes us to page 27, WMATA operating budget. The recommendation was to concur. However, there is a color page item on page 27 that would ask for a report on the strategies WMATA is using for transit-oriented development inside the Capital Beltway.
Move to adopt.
We shouldn't want to increase the appropriation. Just kidding. Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On page 28 is the PAYGO grant for WMATA. The recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On pages 29 through 31 for debt service requirements in Department of Transportation are 3 annual budget bill language. The first establishes the debt outstanding cap for fiscal 2024 for consolidated transportation bonds. The second requests reports on non-traditional debt. And the third item on page 30 sets non-traditional debt limits. The agency concurs with all 3 of these items.
Move to adopt all 3 of the items.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
That takes us to page 32, which is the State Highway Administration, 32 and 33. For both the operating capital, the recommendations were both to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? I'm taking that as a motion to adopt both. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
And the same thing for pages 34 and 35. This is the port operating and port capital allowances. The recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred.
Move both operating and capital adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On pages 36 and 37 is the Motor Vehicle Administration Operating and PAYGO. DLS recommendations for both items are to concur with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred for both.
Move to adopt both.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
The next item is the Maryland Transit Administration on page 38. DLS recommended adopting language to the special fund restricting $100,000 pending a series of bi-monthly reports on progress on the Purple Line Light Rail project, and the agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On page 39, the Transit Administration PAYGO, the DLS recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
All in favor? Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On page 40, the Maryland Aviation Administration, the DLS recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. However, there is one color page item for your consideration on page 40. This item requests the agency to provide a report with description of solar arrays that are currently at BWI Marshall Airport, in addition to opportunities to expand this solar infrastructure.
Move to adopt both.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On page 41, the Aviation Administration PAYGO capital budget, the DLS recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On page 42 and 43 is the operating and PAYGO budgets for the Maryland Transportation Authority. The DLS had no recommendation because this is a non-budgeted agency, and the agency concurred for both.
Next item.
On page 44 is the Department of Natural Resources. First recommendation there is to restrict funding for the annual Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund work and expenditure plans. The agency concurred in part. Okay with submitting the report, just not the funding restriction.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? Next item.
The bottom of page 44, going on page 45, is annual narrative on a summary of Chesapeake Bay restoration spending, and the agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed? Next item.
On page 46, the Department of Agriculture, DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred. However, there is a color page item for your consideration to reduce $6 million for the Maryland Agricultural and Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation's Next Generation Farmland Acquisition Program funding. So there's $10 million in the fiscal 24 budget. This will reduce $6 million of that funding. There's a separate action that will be taken to add the money back for a particular purpose. That will be taken, my understanding, at the full committee level.
Move to adopt CP1.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On page 47 is the Department of the Environment. First recommendation there is to restrict $200,000 until the submission of the annual Maryland Used Tire Cleanup and Recycling Fund report. The agency concurred in part. They just don't want the funding restricted. They'll submit the report.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
Recommendation number 2 concerns a $200,000 restriction until a submission of a confirmatory letter about personnel expenditures budgeting. The agency concurred in part. They're willing to provide the information. They just don't want the funding restriction.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
Bottom of page 48, going to page 49, recommendation number 3 is to restrict $100,000 until the submission of a revised fee structure due to the concerns about general fund support being provided for 3 of Maryland Department of the Environment's administrations for a number of years now. The agency is okay with this. They just don't want the funding restricted.
Move to reject and adopt CP1 on page 49.
Good
Yeah,
call.
do you want to just explain,
Well, you
Andrew?
beat me there.
But you're
So
way
there's
ahead,
that
you're
color
way
page.
ahead of the curve, Madam Vice Chair.
You
Wow.
beat me. That's exactly right. So
did
on
it right.
page 50, there's a color page. And very good.
Yeah, so this, for the benefit of our millions of fans, this just revises the specifics of the report. All right, I'm not sure we took a vote on that. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On the bottom of page 51, going on to page 53, is annual language restricting funding for quarterly reports. This is for the Maryland Department of the Environment and the Maryland Department of Agriculture. This is about enforcement and inspection position strength assessment and vacant position filling. And the agency is okay with this, so let's submit the reports. They just don't want the funding restriction.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
So on page 54 is color page number 2. There's the first one there is a text alert system for environmental accidents. It'll be narrative that will be due September 29, 2023.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
On the bottom of page 54 is the third color page item is for narrative on an ambient air monitoring report.
Move to adopt.
Discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Next item.
Maryland Environmental Service, on page 56, the DLS recommendation is to adopt a narrative to ask the agency to provide an annual funding statement, and the agency concurred.
Move to adopt.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I believe I need a motion to adopt the full report, Steve, is that
Move
correct?
to adopt the full report.
Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Great. All right, I believe that is it. So thank you again to all of our analysts and staff and all the subcommittee members. And subcommittee members, if you could just stay for a minute, including you, Mr. Vice Chair, would love to just take a photo. So thank you all very much. Have a great afternoon.
Do we have to